I have a friend who asked me a question about my opinions on homosexuality and as a Christian, what I see in the Bible and whatnot. So normally I would write this all out and either respond in email form, but I kind of hurt my finger and it's my main pointy typey finger. And writing sucks. Okay, the question of homosexuality. I think that there's two major issues around that topic that are two separate issues. On the one hand, you have, first of all, a group of people who are trying to wrestle with and decide whether or not homosexuality is a sin, i.e., a act of disobedience against God. So you've got that. The second issue is that you have a group of people who are wanting to force their beliefs on the larger society. They are trying to take the issue of homosexuality and the morals that they are deciding around it and say, okay, it doesn't matter if you are a Christian or not. We want to make this written into our laws so that everyone, whether or not they're Christian, has to abide by them. So concerning the second issue, that's its own huge, big, complicated mess. But when it comes down to it, one, I don't think Christians should ever try to force their morals and values on the larger society. Just like I wouldn't want Muslims or Jews or Buddhists trying to write their morals and values into law. And second, it's a justice issue and God cares about justice. And so whether you believe homosexuality is right or wrong, again, creating laws to govern larger society that are actually unjust just smacks of hypocrisy to me. So that's its own issue and it's a lot deeper than that. But today I'm just looking at what Christian scriptures have to say about homosexuality. So I would recommend this book. It's really short and it's to the point and it respects both sides of the discussion. Obviously, we are working with Holy Scriptures that have been thousands of years in the making throughout many different cultures, and so interpretation can be difficult, and we're humans, which means that we have a tendency to be idiots. In the Old Testament, there are actually only 4 places where homosexuality is a part of the discussion or story, and there's 2 that are stories and 2 that are more straight-up commandments. So the first story is found in Genesis 19 about Sodom and Gomorrah, where you had a group of people who wanted to gang rape some guests in the house. The guests were men, and instead the owner of the house sent out his 2 virgin daughters to be gang raped instead. The second story is in Judges 19, where you have a similar situation where there is a man who is staying overnight in a town. There's a group of men who want to gang rape him, and instead of going out himself, he sends out his concubine. They gang rape her, and she dies as a result. Both these stories really have nothing to do with homosexuality. It has to do with gang rape. The wickedness and the sin and the evil that is railed against in scriptures surrounding these stories is about the gang rape, the hate, the hurt, and the destruction that these people wanted to cause. The gender of the person they wanted to rape was not the issue. It was the fact that they wanted to rape someone. The other 2 instances where homosexuality is talked about in the Old Testament have to do with purity laws. In ancient Israel, you had what was considered sin, and still is considered sin, where the nature of your heart and your actions and your soul, you were rebelling against God or just doing something to harm others, that all fell in the category of sin. Whereas then you had the purity laws, which really had absolutely nothing to do with you and who you were as a person. Instead, it had to do with other stuff getting on you and making you unclean by association. So, for example, husbands could not sleep with their wives when they were on their period because the menstruation blood getting on the man would somehow make him unclean, and therefore he would need to go purify himself again. Basically, what's behind the purity laws is the belief that God is all about wholeness and order and integrity, and anything that contradicts that is bad. So you have anything that would be considered impure or disorderly or something that causes chaos, like inbreeding cattle or mixing fibers, that would be considered impure, and therefore they would try to avoid that at all costs. So both those places in the Old Testament, in Leviticus actually, where it's actually condemned as something that is completely impure and should not be practiced, is exactly that. It's part of the impurity laws, not considered sin. But on the other side of the fence, it still straight up says, you know, homosexuality is not okay. But there's a couple things about culture and context here that I think are really important. First of all, in Jewish culture, homosexuality was kind of considered an affront to a male's honor, and it had nothing to do with the individual, but it had more to do with the community. I mean, the whole culture revolved around the survival of the clan. You had tribes that were traveling from place to place to place. And survival meant that you had to have a healthy, thriving family unit. So to be sleeping with another male meant that you were not producing children, which means you were not providing for the clan. You were not producing children to make the family larger and stronger. And then on top of that, you also have patriarchal society where male lineage was passed down through males. And if the male is sleeping with another male, they are not creating children, and therefore the lineage is disrupted, creating disorder. Hence impurity laws. So here's the other thing that's interesting concerning that. In the New Testament, you have Jesus, Paul, and the other disciples who are saying the purity laws are no longer relevant. So concerning the New Testament, there are two places where Paul condemns homosexuality. And most scholars agree that in that context, it's not a relationship between two adult men, but it's an issue of pedophilia, where the homosexual relationship is actually between a adult male and a boy. Also in Greek culture was the issue that those who were penetrated were considered to be less than. Basically, women were inferior because they were the ones who were penetrated. Therefore, as someone who was homosexual, they were considered inferior and looked down on because they were allowing themselves to be penetrated, which again, wasn't looked on highly. It really wasn't about love. It was about power. We also have the issue of interpretation of the Greek. There are some places where the terms that are translated are actually more appropriate to be translated as prostitute or boy proselyte, proselytes, basically boys who had to work in temples and allow themselves to be sexually molested. You also have the issue that Paul creates a word that is never seen before in Greek that has to do with homosexuality. So it's a long and arduous debate about stuff that gets really dry really quick. And then there's just the fact that it's always about men. There's never any reference to women. And in all of the instances where it's talked about in the context, it rarely has to do with a loving relationship. It has everything to do with the more dark side of humanity where power and lust and control are at the heart of the issue. So that's what I see in scripture. I see that it's not black and white and cut and dry. I see that it's complicated and messy. And I think it's important to remember who it is that we worship. This is a God of love and a God that created this world in a mysterious, crazy, messy fashion where nothing is black and white. And so I would rather err on the side of love and generosity and acceptance than judgment and wrath and hate. So, and I know that there's a lot of Christians out there that say, you know, love the sinner, hate the sin, which is a whole nother soapbox I could get on. So anyway, that's my answer, and I totally believe that I'm probably wrong about most of it, but I think that the other side tends to be completely wrong about most of it as well. And that we just need to remember that we're human and we're fumbling along as best we can, and I just choose to love instead of condemn. So I hope that answers any questions about where I stand on that. It's all on tape. Awesome.